I am 86 years old, and this morning, while the sun was barely coming up over the oak trees in my backyard, I poured myself a cup of black coffee, sat at my mahogany dining table, and signed the final legal documents to completely disinherit all three of my biological children. Not a single dime, not a single photograph, nothing. People call me a monster. My neighbors, the ones who only see the manicured lawn and the polite waves from the driveway, think I've finally lost my mind to dementia. They think I'm just a bitter, crazy old woman who forgot what family means. Society tells us that a mother's love must be unconditional, that no matter how much your children bleed you dry, you must forgive, forget, and open your wallet one more time. But society doesn't know what my children did to me when my heart almost gave out last November. It started as a normal Tuesday. I was out on the porch, pruning the hydrangeas. The next thing I remember, the world tilted sideways. The right side of my face went completely numb, my legs folded beneath me, and the gardening shears slipped from my hand. It was a TIA, a mini stroke. The doctors told me later. I woke up hours later to the harsh, sterile glow of the EQ, tubes tangled in my arms, and the rhythmic beep. Beep, beep of the heart monitor. When I finally managed to pry my eyes open, my three children, David, Sarah, and Mark, were standing at the foot of my hospital bed. You'd think they would be crying. You'd think they would be holding my hand, praying I'd pull through. I scrubbed floors and worked double shifts after their father died to put them all through college to ensure they never went to bed hungry. But they weren't looking at my face. They weren't looking at the heart monitor. They were staring, transfixed, at my chest, specifically at the tarnished silver key I keep on a heavy chain around my neck. I've worn this key for 40 years. My children have always believed it opens a hidden safe deposit box downtown. A mythical vault, they are absolutely convinced, holds their father's vintage coin collection, untraceable bearer bonds, and my grandmother's solid gold heirlooms. They've spent decades whispering about it at Thanksgiving dinners, calculating its worth in their heads, quietly waiting for the day I'd finally stop breathing so they could pry it off my cold, lifeless neck. Lying there in that hospital bed, half paralyzed and terrified, I didn't see the little kids I used to tuck in at night. I saw 3 vultures circling a dying animal. I saw the raw, naked greed in their eyes. They didn't see a mother fighting for her life. They saw a ticking clock, a delayed payday. They thought I was too weak to notice. They thought the stroke had scrambled my brain. They thought I was just a frail, helpless old woman on her way out. After a few minutes of unbearable silence, David, my eldest, signaled to his siblings. They shuffled out of the EQ room to get coffee, pulling the heavy door behind them, but it didn't click shut. It stayed open just a crack. Through that narrow gap, I heard a hushed conversation out in the hallway. A conversation that made my blood run colder than the IR fluid dripping into my veins. It wasn't about my recovery. It wasn't about physical therapy. It was about a place called Shady Pines Care Center, and exactly how fast they could dump me there before the state took my house. They brought me back to my house 3 weeks ago. The home my late husband Arthur and I built in 1982. The home where I scrubbed the hardwood floors on my hands and knees, where I measured their heights on the kitchen door frame, where I baked countless birthday cakes while silently swallowing my own exhaustion. They propped me up in the downstairs guest bedroom, surrounded me with a few cheap plastic water cups, and told me to just rest, Mom. I lay there in the semi-darkness, the afternoon sun filtering through the blinds. My right side still carried the dull, heady ache of the stroke, making every movement a calculated effort. But my hearing was as sharp as a razor. From the living room, just down the hall, I heard the unmistakable chime of crystal, my good Waterford crystal. Sarah had opened a bottle of Arthur's prized 2005 Merlot, the one he was saving for a special occasion that he never lived to see. They weren't celebrating my survival. They were holding a board meeting. Medicaid has a 5-year look-back period. David's voice drifted down the hallway. He used that smug corporate tone he usually reserved for his underlings at the firm. If she stays here and needs in-home care, it'll bleed the estate dry. If she goes into a facility later, the state will put a lion on this house. We have to move the assets now, before she completely loses her marbles. I stopped breathing. The house was suddenly so quiet I could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the foyer. "What about Shady Pines?" Mark chimed in, his voice slightly muffled as he chewed on the imported crackers they had brought for themselves. "I drove by it yesterday. It's not the Ritz. The reviews online are pretty bleak, but they take her Medicare plan. And more importantly, it's cheap. It won't touch the principle of the trust." Shady Pines. I knew the place. Everyone in town knew the place. It was a sterile, linoleum-floored warehouse right off the interstate. A place where discarded elders were parked in wheelchairs facing blank walls, the air permanently thick with the smell of industrial bleach and boiled cabbage. It wasn't a care facility, it was God's waiting room, a place you send someone when you want them to die quickly and quietly. Sarah took a slow sip of the wine. "We can clear out this house by the end of the month," she said smoothly, not a hint of hesitation in her voice. "I'll tell her it's just a temporary rehab facility. Just until she gets her strength back. Once she's in there, David, you activate the medical power of attorney. We sell the house, split the liquid assets, and finally, we get to see what that silver key actually opens." Underneath my thin blanket, my trembling fingers found the heavy chain around my neck. The tarnished silver key felt like a block of ice against my chest, my own flesh and blood. The children I had sacrificed my youth for, the ones whose debts I had quietly paid off, whose failed marriages I had funded, whose tears I had wiped away. They were sitting 50 feet away, drinking my dead husband's wine, literally calculating the depreciation of my life. A single tear slid down my wrinkled cheek, soaking into the pillowcase. But it wasn't a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of pure, unadulterated, blinding rage. I realized right then that I was no longer a mother to them. I was a liability, an obstacle standing between their greedy fingers and my bank accounts. If I confronted them right then, if I screamed and cried, they would simply use my hysteria as documented proof of my declining mental state. I had to be smarter. I had to play dead, while I plotted a financial resurrection they would never see coming. Suddenly, the floorboards creaked. Heavy footsteps were walking down the hallway, heading straight for my bedroom door. It was Sarah. I quickly snapped my eyes shut, letting my mouth hang open slightly, forcing my breathing into a ragged, shallow rhythm, playing the pathetic, frail victim they desperately wanted me to be. The door creaked open. Sarah stood over my bed in the dark for a long, agonizing minute. I could smell the expensive perfume I had bought her for Christmas, and then I felt her cold hands slowly reaching down toward my neck. Sarah's cold, manicured fingers brushed against my collarbone. I forced my breathing to remain ragged and heavy, an agonizingly slow rhythm that burned my lungs. She traced the silver chain down to my sternum, her acrylic nail tapping lightly against the tarnished key. I could feel the sheer, unadulterated greed radiating from her in the dark room. I waited for the pinch of the clasp. I waited for her to yank it right off my neck, but she didn't. She just leaned in close, her expensive perfume suffocating me, and whispered into the empty air. "Soon." Then she turned on her heel and walked out, clicking the door shut. In that exact moment, the mother who had loved them, the woman who had spent 60 years putting everyone else first, died completely. The woman who remained in that bed was a survivor. They wanted a helpless, senile old crone. Fine, I was going to give them an Academy Award-winning performance. If you want to outsmart predators, you have to convince them you are the perfect prey. Over the next few days, I became a ghost in my own house. I weaponized my own aging. When Mark brought me my morning oatmeal, I let my hands shake violently, deliberately spilling the lukewarm slop onto my pristine floral nightgown. I stopped doing my crossword puzzles. Instead, I spent hours staring blankly at the daytime soap operas on the television, letting my jaw hang slack, occasionally muttering nonsense to the wall. When David came in to check on me, wearing his $3,000 suit paid for by the college fund I sacrificed my 20s to build, I answered his questions with a confused, vacant smile. I asked him what time his father was coming home from the plant. Arthur, who had been dead for 2 decades. Oh, they ate it up. They absolutely reveled in my decay. They became so confident in my cognitive decline that they stopped hiding their intentions. David started making business calls in the kitchen, his voice booming down the hallway. I sat in my wheelchair in the living room, a knitted blanket over my knees, as he openly discussed the square footage of my property with a real estate broker. "Don't worry about the current occupant," David told the man on the phone, glancing right at me as I mindlessly stroked the edge of my blanket. "She doesn't understand a word. The lights are on, but nobody's home. We'll have the property fully vacated and ready for staging by the end of the month." It took every ounce of my willpower not to stand up, walk over, and slap the smug, entitled grin right off his face. I could feel my blood pressure spiking, the lingering weakness from the stroke pulsing in my temple. But I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I knew the rules of this new game. Anger is loud and reckless. Vengeance. Vengeance is completely silent. I just needed to buy enough time to recover my physical strength. I needed 1 hour alone in this house to find the hidden landline and contact the one man in this town ruthless enough to help me. Arthur's old estate attorney, a cutthroat bulldog of a lawyer named Thomas. By Wednesday evening, my strategy was flawless. I had memorized Thomas's private number from the old address book hidden beneath my mattress. I was ready to strike the moment my children left the house for their Thursday morning country club brunch. But on Thursday morning, the script suddenly flipped. The bedroom door didn't just creak open, it swung wide. The heavy scent of fresh cinnamon, vanilla, and brewing espresso, my absolute favorite, wafted into the sterile room. It was David, carrying a polished silver tray loaded with a steaming home-cooked breakfast. Behind him, Sarah held a beautifully wrapped box tied with a velvet ribbon, her eyes glistening with what looked like genuine, heartbreaking tears. Even Mark was there, holding a massive bouquet of yellow lilies, the flowers I had carried at my wedding. "Mom," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with raw affection as she rushed to my bedside, gently taking my wrinkled hand in hers. "Mom, we are so sorry we've been distant. We were just so scared of losing you." I stared at the tray, my heart suddenly hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The cruelty was gone. The coldness had vanished. Had they overheard me moving around? Had my near-death experience finally shattered their selfishness and awakened their souls? Or was this sudden, blinding display of love the deadliest trap they had set yet? I stared at the silver tray, the rich aroma of cinnamon and vanilla flooding my senses. It was the exact recipe I used to bake for them on snowy Sunday mornings when they were little. My heart, that fragile, battered muscle, betrayed me. It fluttered. "We'd been so awful, Mom," Sarah sobbed, actually dropping to her knees beside my bed. She hastily untied the velvet ribbon on the box. Inside was a thick, luxurious cashmere blanket, the kind of expensive luxury I had never allowed myself to buy. She draped it over my frail shoulders, her hands surprisingly gentle. "We were just so terrified when you had the stroke. We didn't know how to handle it. We panicked." David, the stoic corporate shark, looked down at his polished Italian leather shoes. When he spoke, his voice was thick with what sounded like genuine, crushing shame. "We had some desperate conversations, Mom, in the hallway, about how to afford your care. We were stressed. We said things we didn't mean. But we figured it out." Mark stepped forward, placing the bright yellow lilies in a crystal vase on my nightstand. He looked at me with those big, earnest eyes he used to have as a boy. "You're not going anywhere, Mom. We're not putting you in a home." We pooled our money together. For 60 years, I had been biologically wired to forgive these three people. It is the heaviest, most dangerous curse of motherhood. The desperate, pathetic need to believe the absolute best about the children you birthed, even when they are holding the knife to your back. My mind began to race, desperately rewriting the narrative to save my family. Did I misinterpret their hushed whispers? Was the talk about shady pines just the panicked rambling of children terrified of the American healthcare system and medical bankruptcy? They were here now. They were apologizing. They bought my favorite flowers. A single hot tear rolled down my wrinkled cheek. This time, I wasn't acting. I wasn't the survivor playing dead. I was just a tired 86-year-old mother who wanted her kids to love her. "We hired someone, Mom," David said softly, picking up a silver fork to cut a piece of the cinnamon roll for me, "a private, in-home care specialist. She's top tier. She's going to live right here with you. Make sure you take your heart medication and help you with your physical therapy." You get to stay in your own house, surrounded by your things, forever. I looked at my 3 children. The vultures from the EQ seemed to have vanished, replaced by the frightened little kids who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I closed my eyes, letting the cashmere blanket warm my aching bones, silently thanking God that I hadn't managed to call Thomas the lawyer yet. I had almost destroyed my entire family over a terrible misunderstanding. She's actually waiting outside right now, Sarah whispered, wiping her mascara and squeezing my hand. Can we bring her in to meet you? I nodded slowly, a weak, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in weeks. David walked out to the foyer and opened the heavy oak front door. A woman stepped into the house. She wore crisp, navy blue medical scrubs and carried herself with a warm, bright professionalism. But as she walked into my bedroom, the morning light caught her face, and my dormant survivor instinct, the one I had just joyfully put to sleep, violently woke up. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't look at my resting pulse rate. She didn't even look at my face. Her eyes immediately darted up to the original crown molding, then down to the condition of the hardwood floors, and finally, she meticulously measured the dimensions of the bay window with her eyes, and in her right hand she wasn't carrying a blood pressure cuff or a medical bag. She was gripping a thick, leather-bound briefcase. Before I could process the cold dread pooling in my stomach, David casually slid a stack of freshly printed, densely typed papers onto the silver breakfast tray, right next to my half-eaten cinnamon roll. The nurse just needs a few quick signatures for her agency's liability waivers, Mom. He smiled, his voice perfectly smooth as he clicked a sleek black pen and pressed it into my trembling fingers. Jiminy said the heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc pen felt like a loaded gun in my trembling fingers. David tapped his manicured index finger on a yellow sticky note shaped like an arrow. Just right here, Mom, and your initials on the next 3 pages. It's standard boilerplate stuff, so she can legally administer your medication. I looked down at the stack of papers. My eyesight isn't quite what it used to be, but you don't need 20/20 vision to recognize the scent of a slaughterhouse. I let my eyes glaze over, playing the part of the confused, compliant matriarch, but my mind was scanning the text with the ruthless precision of a hawk. The bold, capitalized letters at the top of the first page didn't say liability waiver. They said irrevocable durable power of attorney and declaration of medical proxy. My eyes darted down the page, catching the dense legal jargon, granting full, unrestricted authority to liquidate real property, transfer of all financial instruments, inclusive of all secure storage units and safe deposit boxes. They weren't trying to care for me. They were legally euthanizing my independence. If I signed that paper, I would cease to exist as a free citizen. David would have a legal right to drain my bank accounts, sell the house right from under my feet, and march me into Shady Pines before the ink was even dry. And that little clause about secure storage units, that was their master key to whatever they thought my silver necklace opened. I slowly lifted my head and looked at the nurse. She was standing near the bay window, pulling a small black device from her pocket, a laser tape measure. She pressed a button, shooting a red dot across the room to the far wall. She jotted a number down on a clipboard, leaned over to my daughter and whispered, "The square footage is phenomenal. If we tear down this load-bearing wall, we can list it for at least 20% over market value." A nurse? The cinnamon roll sitting on the silver tray suddenly smelled like rotting garbage. The beautiful yellow lilies on the nightstand looked like funeral flowers. The entire morning, the tears, the apologies, the cashmere blanket, was nothing but a meticulously choreographed Broadway production designed to disarm me. They had used my deepest, most pathetic vulnerability, a mother's desperate hope that her children actually loved her, as a weapon to get my signature. The grief that had warmed my chest just 3 minutes ago instantly calcified into cold, impenetrable ice. "Come on, Mom," Mark urged, checking his Rolex. "We have a tea time at 11. Just sign it so you can rest." I had to get out of this. If I refused to sign, they would know I was completely lucid. They would drag a crooked notary in here, or worse, take me to a judge, and use my stroke as proof of my incompetence. I had to destroy the documents without breaking character. I let out a weak, rattling cough. My hand, the right one, the side affected by the stroke, began to shake violently. "Oh dear," I rasped, my voice sounding paper thin. I'm so thirsty all of a sudden. My mouth is so dry." I reached past the legal documents toward the crystal glass of ice water. I didn't just knock it over. I drove the heel of my palm into the heavy glass with every ounce of strength I could muster. The glass shattered against the silver tray. A tidal wave of ice water and black coffee flooded the tray, completely drowning the thick stack of legal documents. The pristine white paper instantly turned into a soggy, illegible brown mess. The facade dropped in a fraction of a second. "Jesus Christ, Mom," David roared, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. He violently snatched the dripping, ruined papers from the tray, glaring at me with a hatred so pure it took my breath away. "Look what you just did, you stupid, clumsy old—" He caught himself, but the damage was done. The mask was off. Sarah grabbed his arm, her eyes flashing with panic. "David, stop it. We'll just go to your office and print new copies. It'll take 45 minutes. She looked at me, her voice dripping with venom. "Don't move, Mother. We will be right back." They stormed out of the house, slamming the front door so hard the framed family portraits rattled on the walls. The nurse followed close behind. The house fell into a dead, heavy silence. I sat up in bed, threw the expensive cashmere blanket onto the floor, and wiped the spilled coffee off my hands. 45 minutes. That was exactly how much time I had to liquidate my entire life before the vultures returned. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut and the tires of David's BMW screeched out of the driveway, the pathetic, trembling old woman vanished. I kicked the ruined breakfast tray off the bed, letting the shattered crystal and soggy cinnamon roll hit the floor. Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. It burned through the lingering numbness of my stroke like a wildfire. I swung my legs over the edge of the mattress, stood up straight, and walked out of the guest room with a steady, purposeful stride. 44 minutes left. I bypassed the kitchen and headed straight for Arthur's old mahogany-paneled study. It was the only room my children hadn't dared to inventory yet, because I still kept the deadbolt locked. I reached behind the heavy velvet drapes and pulled out a dusty analog rotary phone plugged directly into the wall. A private landline Arthur had installed in the 90s that I never stopped paying for. I spun the dial, the heavy clicking echoing in the quiet house. He answered on the second ring. A gravelly, no-nonsense voice that smelled of expensive cigars and ruthless litigation over the receiver. "Thomas," I said, my voice cold and crystal clear. "Arthur's offspring are moving in for the kill. They just tried to force a durable power of attorney on me." There was a heavy pause on the line, then a dark, cynical chuckle. "I told Arthur those kids were too soft, Eleanor. Soft and greedy. How much time do we have?" 42 minutes before they return with fresh copies. "Understood," Thomas said, the sound of furious typing echoing in the background. "We are going nuclear. I'm drafting an irrevocable blind trust right now. The beneficiary will be an LLC registered in Delaware under a fictitious name. The moment you sign, your Vanguard mutual funds, your municipal bonds, and every liquid penny you own will vanish into a legal fortress they cannot touch, see, or subpoena. They'll need a federal judge and 10 years of litigation just to find out what state the money is in." "What about the house, Thomas? They brought a real estate appraiser here disguised as a home care nurse." "I have a private equity contact who buys distressed properties for cash, sight unseen," Thomas replied without missing a beat. "We'll execute a sale-leaseback agreement. He buys the deed to your house today and leases it back to you for 30 days. The title transfers silently. When your children finally try to list the property, they'll discover their mother doesn't own a single brick of it." To send the paperwork, Nye paralegal is already leaving the office. He'll be at your back gate in 12 minutes. The next half hour was a blur of calculated ice-cold vengeance. When Marcus, a sharp-eyed young paralegal, slipped through the garden gate carrying a leather satchel, I didn't hesitate. We stood at the kitchen island, no trembling fingers, no spilled water. I gripped his heavy fountain pen and signed my name 22 times with violent, flawless precision. With every stroke of the pen, I was erasing my children's inheritance. I was selling the roof over my head. I was vaporizing a lifetime of accumulated wealth. I was giving away everything I owned, but for the first time in my 86 years, I was doing it on my terms. "It's done, Mrs. Vance," Marcus whispered, sliding the thick stack of documents back into his satchel. "The wire transfers will execute within the hour. You are officially, legally destitute." He slipped out the back door just as the grandfather clock in the foyer chimed the quarter hour. I had exactly 2 minutes left. I rushed back to the guest bedroom, my heart pounding against my ribs. I threw myself under the covers, pulled the sheets up to my chin, and let my jaw go slack. I forced my breathing to slow down, staring blankly at the ceiling. A heavy silence descended on the house, and then the unmistakable sound of a key sliding into the front door lock. The door swung open. Heavy, angry footsteps marched down the hallway. But it wasn't just David and Sarah this time. I heard the deep, unfamiliar voice of a fourth person, a man, talking in a low, authoritative tone. "If she refuses to sign these new copies," the strange man was saying as they stopped right outside my bedroom door, "I have the syringe ready. We can legally classify her as agitated and administer the sedative. Once she's under, the ambulance for Shady Pines is on standby." The man in the white coat stepped into the dim light of the guest room. He wasn't a real doctor. He had the thick neck and dead, vacant eyes of a private orderly, the kind of muscle you hire off the books to handle difficult family transitions quietly. In his massive, latex-gloved hand, he flicked the plastic syringe, a single bead of clear liquid blooming at the needle's tip. "Hold her shoulders down, David," the orderly mumbled, stepping toward my bed. "This is a mild chemical restraint, Haldol. She'll be asleep in 3 minutes and we can load her into the transport van." My children were actually going to drug me. They were going to chemically straitjacket their own mother just to steal the deed to a house I no longer owned. I didn't scream. I didn't try to fight. A physical struggle would only give them the exact excuse they needed to legally declare me a danger to myself. Instead, I let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. I shrank back against the headboard, pulling the sheets up to my chin, letting my eyes widen in sheer, manufactured terror. "Please," I croaked, my voice shaking flawlessly. "David, please don't let him stick me. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't hurt me." David paused. The sadistic little smirk that crawled across his face in that moment is something I will never, ever forget. He held up his hand, stopping the orderly. "See, I told you she just needed a little motivation," David sneered. He pulled the freshly printed power of attorney from his leather briefcase and clicked his gold pen. "Sign them all, Mom, every single page. And no accidents this time." I took the pen. With an exaggerated, violently trembling hand, I painstakingly traced my signature on the bottom of all 20 pages. I signed away my medical rights. I signed away my financial proxy. I handed my firstborn son the absolute unchecked legal authority to manage my entire estate. What David didn't know was that he was now the proud, undisputed lord and master of an estate that was worth exactly $0 He was holding a loaded gun with no bullets. "Good girl, Mom," David whispered, snatching the papers back. He looked at Sarah. "Cancel the van. We'll let her rest for a few days so the neighbors don't get suspicious. We move her to Shady Pines on Tuesday morning." They left the room, celebrating their hollow victory, and I went to work. Over the next 4 days, while my children meticulously packed up my antique china in the kitchen and argued loudly over who would get the Persian rugs, I was on the hidden rotary phone with Thomas. The $3.8 million from my liquidated assets had successfully settled into the Delaware Blind Trust. Now, it was time to spend it. Money is completely useless if you die before you can weaponize it to save your own life. I didn't just want comfort. I wanted an impenetrable fortress. I directed Thomas to wire $2 million in a single, non-refundable lump sum to an establishment called the Grand Oakhaven Reserve. It is not a nursing home. It is an ultra-exclusive, gated luxury medical resort built for retired COs and aging elites. It sits on 200 acres of private coastline. It features Michelin star chefs, a heated saltwater therapy pool, and a staff of private physicians on call 24/7. More importantly, it is surrounded by 10-foot wrought iron fences and former military security personnel. Once you are inside, no one, absolutely no one, gets past the front gates without your explicit, recorded authorization. On Monday night, Marcus the paralegal slipped a sleek, matte black VIP keycard through my bedroom window. It was my golden ticket. I lay in the dark that night, clutching the heavy black keycard in one hand and the tarnished silver key in the other. I was finally untouchable. Tuesday morning arrived. The sun was shining brightly through the oak trees. I heard the grinding gears of a cheap, rented moving van pulling into my driveway. My children were here. They had come to drag me to the linoleum hell of Shady Pines. But as I heard their heavy footsteps stomping up the front porch, they didn't realize that I had already called for my own ride. Tuesday morning arrived with a crisp, mocking brightness. At precisely 9,000 am, I heard the heavy, sputtering engine of a rusted Ford Econoline van pull into my driveway, its tires crushing the gravel. Through the bedroom window, I saw the faded letters on the side, Shady Pines Care Center, Non-Emergency Transport. Right behind it was David's silver BMO. My 3 children stepped out, holding plastic trash bags for my clothes. They were laughing, actually laughing. Sarah was sipping a 7 iced latte, completely at ease with the fact that she was about to incarcerate her mother in a linoleum wasteland. I didn't panic. I didn't tremble. I simply stood up from the bed, walked over to my closet, and bypassed the stained floral nightgowns they had bought me. I reached to the very back and pulled out my vintage tailored Channel suit, the one I hadn't worn since Arthur's funeral. I slipped it on, smoothing out the immaculate fabric. I put on my pearl earrings. I applied a sharp, perfect coat of ruby red lipstick. The frail, terrified old woman was dead. The matriarch had returned. Downstairs, the heavy oak front door swung open. "Mom." I picked up my vintage leather handbag, gripped the handrail, and began to descend the staircase. Not with a cane, not with a limp. I walked down those stairs with the straight-backed, imposing posture of a woman who owned the world. When they looked up and saw me, the laughter instantly died in their throats. Sarah actually dropped her iced latte. It shattered on the floor, brown liquid splashing across the Persian rug. "Mom," Mark whispered, his eyes wide, terrified by the sudden, terrifying clarity in my face. "What? What are you wearing? Why are you out of bed?" Before David could even formulate a sentence, a shadow fell over the open front door. A massive, gleaming black Lincoln Navigator glided silently up the driveway, effortlessly boxing in the cheap Shady Pines transport van. The driver's door opened, and a man built like a heavyweight boxer stepped out. He was dressed in a flawless black suit, an earpiece curled around his neck. He wasn't an orderly. He was private security from the Grand Oakhaven Reserve. He walked right past my dumbfounded children, stepped into my foyer, and gave me a crisp, respectful nod. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance," he said, his deep voice vibrating through the quiet house. "Your private ocean view suite is fully prepped. The chef has your espresso and warm croissants waiting." "Shall we?" "Yes, Marcus," I replied, my voice smooth as silk, completely devoid of the rattling cough I had faked for weeks. "Let's." "Hold on, wait a damn minute." David suddenly snapped out of his shock, his face flushing violently red. He stepped in front of the security guard, pulling the crumpled legal documents from his jacket pocket. "She isn't going anywhere. I have an irrevocable medical power of attorney. I am legally in charge of this woman." Marcus, the security guard, didn't even blink. He just looked down at David with the cold, dead-eyed stare of a man who dealt with corporate assassins for a living. "Sir," Marcus rumbled softly, "if you touch my client or attempt to obstruct her movement, I will physically break your arm. Step aside." David froze. The corporate shark suddenly realized he was swimming with a megalodon. He slowly backed away. I walked past my 3 children, the scent of my expensive Channel perfume cutting through the sterile bleach smell of the Shady Pines orderlies. I didn't yell. I didn't curse them out. I just looked Sarah dead in the eyes and offered a polite, chilling smile. I stepped out onto the porch and climbed into the plush, butter-soft leather interior of the Lincoln. Marcus closed the heavy door with a solid thud, instantly silencing the outside world. As the luxury SUV slowly backed out of the driveway, I watched my children standing on the porch through the tinted glass. They looked completely lost, but their confusion was about to turn into sheer apocalyptic panic. Because just as my Lincoln turned onto the main road, another vehicle pulled into the driveway. It was a silver Porsche, and out stepped the ruthless private equity buyer my lawyer had sold the house to, holding a shiny new deed and an immediate eviction notice. The Grand Oak Haven Reserve was everything my $2 million promised it would be, and more. By 2:00 p.m. that afternoon, I was reclining on a plush white linen chaise lounge on my private oceanfront balcony. The salty Pacific breeze tangled in my hair. A young, impeccably dressed attendant named Julian had just set a crystal glass of sparkling water and a plate of warm, truffle-infused scallops on the glass table next to me. My blood pressure was a perfect 20/50/80. I hadn't felt this physically strong, this completely unburdened, in 4 decades. Then, the sleek, new smartphone Thomas had provided for me began to buzz against the glass table. The caller I'd simply read, "David." I let it ring 3 times. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, relishing the crisp bite of the lime. Then I swiped the green button and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello, David," I said, my voice as calm and smooth as the ocean stretching out before me. "What the hell did you do?" The sheer, unadulterated panic in my son's voice was so loud, I had to pull the phone an inch away from my ear. He wasn't using his smug, corporate tone anymore. He sounded like a terrified little boy who had just set the house on fire. In the background, I could hear Sarah hysterically sobbing and Mark screaming at someone. "I'm enjoying a rather lovely scallop, David," I replied evenly. "Is there a problem? A man is here, with police officers." David screamed, his breath ragged. "He has a deed. He says he bought the house last week, and the bank. The bank manager just called me back. They said your Vanguard accounts are gone. The checking, the savings, the bonds, zero. They said you transferred everything out." "That is entirely correct, but I have power of attorney." He roared, the desperation cracking his voice. "I have the legal documents. You signed them this morning. You gave me control of your estate." I let out a soft, cold chuckle. It was a sound I hadn't made in years. "Oh, David, you are a terrible lawyer," I whispered, my tone dropping into a freezing register. "A power of attorney only gives you control over the assets I actually own. But as of Thursday afternoon, I am legally destitute. I don't own a single brick of that house. I don't own a single share of stock. Every penny I possessed was liquidated and transferred into a Delaware irrevocable blind trust. A trust you cannot subpoena, touch, or manage. You are the absolute lord and master of an estate that is worth exactly $0. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I could practically hear the gears in his head grinding to a violent, catastrophic halt. The realization was hitting him like a freight train. The mother they thought they were playing had masterminded their financial execution right under their noses. "You set us up," David breathed, the horror finally sinking in. "You faked the dementia. You faked the weakness. You let us think we were winning. You wanted to put me in Shady Pines to protect your inheritance," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "You brought an orderly into my bedroom with a syringe. You were willing to erase my humanity for a few square feet of hardwood flooring and a wine collection. You stopped being my children the moment you treated my life as a depreciation expense." "Mom, please," Sarah's voice suddenly broke through on the speakerphone, thick with tears and genuine terror. The eviction notice was evidently being enforced downstairs. "Where are we supposed to go? We already maxed out our credit cards anticipating the trust payout. Please, Mom, don't do this to us." "Society says a mother's love is unconditional, Sarah," I replied, watching a seagull dive into the pristine ocean water. "But my bank account is not. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises before the new owner's private security forcibly removes your belongings. You vindictive, crazy old bitch. David suddenly snapped, losing whatever shred of sanity he had left. You burned it all down. We get nothing after everything we. Not nothing, David, I interrupted smoothly, cutting off his tantrum. I didn't leave you with absolutely nothing. I reached up and touched my bare collarbone. Check the kitchen island, I whispered, a dark, victorious smile spreading across my face. I left something for you, the tarnished silver key, the one you've been staring at on my neck for 40 years. It belongs to safety deposit box number 42 at the First National Bank downtown. I've already authorized your access. Go see what your inheritance truly looks like. I didn't wait to hear David's reaction. I simply tapped the red button ending the call and placed the sleek phone face down on the glass table. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythmic crashing of the Pacific waves. I didn't need to be in the vault at the First National Bank to know exactly how it played out. I had orchestrated it perfectly. I could picture David, Sarah, and Mark speeding downtown in a blind panic, practically shoving each other out of the way to get into the bank. They would have rushed past the tellers, demanding access to the subterranean vault, their eyes wide, with the desperate, pathetic hope that salvation was waiting inside. I could see David's trembling hands as he finally slid that tarnished silver key, the one they had coveted like a holy relic for 40 years, into the lock of box 42. The heavy metallic click, the screech of the metal hinge as he yanked the long, rectangular box out from the wall. No vintage coin collection. No untraceable bearer bonds. No solid gold heirlooms. The bottom of the metal box was completely bare, save for a small stack of cheap, glossy pamphlets and a single piece of my monogram stationery. David would pick up the pamphlets. His blood would run cold as he read the bold, cheerful lettering on the cover. Shady Pines Care Center, Affordable Senior Living. And beneath those pamphlets, written in my steady, flawless cursive, was a final message to the children I had birthed, raised, and finally, completely destroyed. Since you were all so incredibly fond of this facility, I have left you these brochures. This is your only inheritance. Keep them safe. You are going to need them for your own old age, because there will be no one left to pay for your care. Goodbye. I took another sip of my sparkling water. The sun was beginning to set over the ocean, casting a brilliant, fiery glow across the balcony. Society tells us that the greatest tragedy a person can face is growing old and dying alone. They tell us that we must tolerate disrespect, financial abuse, and emotional manipulation simply because the people inflicting it. We are conditioned to believe that setting brutal boundaries with our own children is a sin. But let me tell you the brutal truth about aging. Dying alone in peace is not a tragedy. Surviving a stroke surrounded by greedy heirs who are silently calculating the depreciation of your life. That is pure hell. If your adult children treat you like an atom, if they only call when they need a bailout, if they look at your home and see a real estate transaction rather than the place that sheltered them, you owe them absolutely nothing. You do not owe them your retirement. You do not owe them your health, and you certainly do not owe them your estate. Sometimes, the most profound act of self-love you can commit in your twilight years is to become completely estranged. Walking away from a toxic family is not a failure of motherhood. It is the ultimate survival strategy. I am 86 years old. I have no house to my name. I have cut off my only children forever. I am entirely, fundamentally alone in this world. And as I sit here, watching the sunset from my impenetrable luxury fortress, feeling the warm ocean breeze against my skin, I have never been more free.